listening and watching Rashkin Report. This is Yuri Rashkin, and I'm excited to be joined by author of an article with this name, Inside Vladimir Putin's Shadowy Army of Global Spies, published by the Daily Beast. Andrei Soldatov, welcome back to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back.
It's a pleasure, but the topic that you write about is that kind of the very inside. We kind of see the man, the naked, Putin, a semi-naked Putin on a horse, but there's all this other stuff underneath that actually like does the work, and we see that he's really at the head of a huge security apparatus. And this security apparatus has developed quite extensively over the time that Putin has been in power, since that's his view of the world. And so they developed this special intelligence service that they had to develop because the old intelligence service couldn't spy on the other countries because they signed an agreement. So they developed a new security agency. Can you talk about this new spy agency that's the Department of Information, and kind of how it came about?
Yeah, it's a topic which has been extremely important for me for 20 years now, because it's all started in May of 2001, and back then I was a chief of editor of department in charge of investigating Russian security services in a weekly newspaper in Moscow, and I got an anonymous letter, handwritten back then, describing the concept and the modus operandi of this new department within the FSB. And back by 2001, we all sort of got used to the idea that the FSB is getting bigger and more important, and Vladimir Putin was a director of the FSB before he became prime minister and then the president of Russia. But nevertheless, we had an idea that this is by definition a domestic security agency. So they are dealing with problems of terror, of dissent, of counterintelligence, but they are not involved in espionage abroad. And that changed. And that changed in 2001 when I got this letter. And initially, the idea, as far as I got it from my experience of writing about this unit, was that, look, we have an opportunity here. Well, back in 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, the KGB was split, and every country, now independent, got its own security services. The idea in Moscow was to develop kind of cooperation between these countries. But to develop this cooperation, you need to win some trust from countries like in newly independent Ukraine or the Baltics. And they thought that probably it would be good to sign an agreement between intelligence agencies of all these new countries with an obligation not to spy on each other. And they did that, and it worked pretty well for more than a decade. But the FSB thought that, look, we didn't sign this agreement because back in 1991, 1992, we didn't have this mandate with this power to spy abroad, but now we have it. We got this thing from our president, which means we are free to go. We can go to Ukraine, we can go to the Baltics, to Kazakhstan or Turkmenistan, and it would be absolutely legal. And that's exactly what they did. But because this, as I said, this investigation took me almost 20 years, and I would say it was a big journey. So I got some walk-ins from this department. I got some letters sent to me, some documents sent to me. Finally, as a website was established specifically to leak the documents of this department, and it got a funny name, lubyanskayapravda.com. Unfortunately, it survived only for 2 weeks, but nevertheless. And it became more and more clear that this department developed more and more and became much more important along with Putin's paranoia, because Putin's got really paranoid after color revolutions, and all of a sudden he understood that he already had something inside of the FSB to deal with the problem of surprising political developments in the post-Soviet Union countries. And that's the way this unit was getting more and more important and powerful. And now there is a rumor that probably the head of this department is might be the next director of the FSB.
It's an interesting, I suppose, fact that when we have an authoritarian state, and the only decision maker is the person in charge, in this case, Vladimir Putin, the institutes kind of, I guess, just are reflections of him. And therefore, if he is going to world as a, kind of threatening place, then FSB and security apparatus would be the brain trust, the biggest thing. In that sense, but it also now, as you describe in your article, it plays a role of like an unofficial State Department for Russia, where we have altogether just a general disagreement between different departments on top of that, where the State Department might disagree with the Defense Department. So there's this kind of a disconnection, but FSB has its own State Department you're describing.
Yes, absolutely. And a foreign intelligence unit, the topic of my article is within this department, which is in charge of maintaining and developing relations with security services of other countries, and including the United States. And that makes it so interesting because on the one hand, you have the FSB generals being involved in messing with political situations in Georgia and Moldova, in Ukraine, and the head of his department was caught actually during the Maidan revolution because he was there ostensibly advising on security of the embassy, but actually advising President Yanukovych what to do with protesters. And on the other hand, the same guy is in charge of maintaining and actually enforcing the cooperation, the counterterrorism cooperation with the United States. And because counterterrorism cooperation is such a big thing, and when you have your people, your citizens in danger, it's a question of national security, which means that you need to talk to very bad guys, not only to good guys, but also to bad guys, including the guys from the FSB.
But counterterrorism is also important, as you describe, in terms of trying to prevent terrorist attacks in the future. And so dealing with, there's been a record and some relationship to the Boston Marathon bombing, where FSB supposedly tried to notify, well, I guess on record, tried to notify our security, FBI, that there was some kind of problem with these people. But honestly, and I know that it makes Russia and FSB seem like, well, we have to talk to them because, they know these people. But it also, we see that it's used so much for political persecution, where Interpol is like thinking, I think, of disconnecting from Russia, or there's pressure because they're trying to use accusations of pedophilia against like political opposition members who live abroad. So how does that, what's the solution there? Like, should we talk to them? Should we not talk to them?
I think you still should talk to them. And every day you have more and more signs that it's a very big topic. Like this year, we got these ransomware attacks originating from Russia, as far as we know, which means we are dealing with a problem of criminal hackers, which means that the American security services need to find a way to talk to the Russians about their criminals who are hiding in Russia. The problem is how to make this worth it, because it cannot be about sharing information with the Russians. It's about sharing information between the Americans and the Russians. Unfortunately, you're absolutely right. This legacy of of the Boston bombings in 2013 is still there, and lots of Americans, lots of people in American law enforcement, they believe that back then they missed this chance and they need now to find a way to talk to the Russians, even if the political situation is extremely difficult, because the policemen, they always have something to talk about, but they have the same mentality, and all of them fight criminals. Unfortunately, for many things, the only door open in Moscow is the door on the bunker. And these days, if you want to talk about criminal hackers, again, you need to go to the FSB. If you want to talk about counterterrorism cooperation, again, you need to go to the FSB. And of course, it's a political organization, and they use every opportunity to promote their agenda. Just to give you one recent example, under Obama, when the sanctions were already established because of Ukraine, nevertheless, Washington invited the chief of the FSB to Washington to talk about counterterrorism cooperation. And this guy, the chief of the FSB, he was already under the sanctions. A bit late in 2018, we got another delegation from Moscow, and that included the head of the GRU, the military intelligence, the head of the foreign intelligence, and the head of the FSB. And we can think, well, of course, you need to talk to these guys because of Syria, and that's why probably we got the GRU head, and we need to talk about Ukraine and about many things. But just before this meeting, and before this visit to Washington, I just know that because I checked this and it was part of my investigation. The FBI wanted to raise an issue of Russian political opposition leaders poisoned in Moscow, and they wanted to do that at this meeting. And at the very final moment before the meeting, they decided against it. So this is pure politics. It has nothing to do with counterterrorism cooperation or sharing information about cyber criminals. It's about political opposition in Russia being poisoned, and the FBI had some information about that. They wanted to make a point, and they were said no. This cooperation is much more important than anything which might happen to the Russian opposition in the country or abroad.
Andrei, it seems like this is information that is very relevant to the states that are surrounding Russia, because they've been getting flooded with Russian spies. They've been kind of suspecting as much, but there's proof, there's documents, there's, again, infrastructure. Do you see this as something that's also spreading beyond that area? And also, what do we do? So.
Yeah, it's a good question, because back in the Soviet Union, which was an extremely aggressive state, while this state had two intelligence organizations most of the time, the military intelligence and the first chief directorate of the KGB. Now, these days, we have three intelligence agencies. We have the SVR, the Russian Foreign Intelligence Agency. We have the GRU, the Russian Military Intelligence Agency. And we have the FSB, Foreign Intelligence Arm. And the question now is what all of them are actually doing, and how they decide what they're going to do. Because they might have some conflict of interest and all that. And in the beginning, in the early 2000s, the idea was that, as I said, because there was an agreement of not spying against each other, that the former Soviet Union would be the area of operations for the FSB. We know that at least starting in 2009, it was not the case anymore. We know of some operations run by the SVR in Ukraine. So, well, that means that you have two intelligence agencies of Russia being active in Ukraine. But also we got some information that the FSB foreign intelligence arm became very active in Western Europe and in the United States. We know that the FSB officers are now attached to the embassies all over the world. It's getting bigger and more ambitious. Just look at the insignia of this department, and every department of the FSB has its insignia, and sometimes it's very, I would say, telling, because what they use, it tells you about the operations. In this case, they chose as a symbol a globe, which means global ambitions.
And what are their global ambitions in that sense? How do you see them trying to, like, use their leverage and because I guess one of the ways that they're tapping into is through the Russian diaspora.
That's exactly the point. There is a commission, governmental commission on the compatriots in Russia, and was launched many years ago. And it's always interesting to look and to check the list of people attached to this commission. And there is always some people from the foreign ministry, which is absolutely understandable, from the migration agency. Again, it's absolutely understandable because it's about Russians who happen to be abroad, but at some point they might decide to get back. So that makes sense. But there is always a guy from the FSB. And it's quite interesting from which department you have this guy. It would be, again, absolutely understandable if it would be somebody from the border service, because the border service now is part of the FSB. Of course, you need to control your borders, and you have the Russians living in Kazakhstan and other republics of Central Asia and the Baltics. Of course, you need to do something about your borders. But why to put on this list a guy from the foreign intelligence of the FSB? And unfortunately or fortunately, but on this commission, you always have somebody from this department, from the Department of Foreign Intelligence of the FSB, which means that they are given this objective to spy and control and supervise the Russian community abroad.
In what sense? How can they supervise? What can they do?
Well, they have all these organizations, the old ones, like, for instance, cultural centers. They always, and they have this long tradition being used by the KGB and by the SVR and the Russian military intelligence. Now they are used by the FSB. And so they are based not only in the embassies, but also in these cultural centers. And that we know that for a fact. Of course, there are some new organizations like under the umbrella of Россотрудничество, and there are many initiatives in Moscow when people are invited to Moscow. So it's a very long, a very complicated story, but in short, it's a very big effort and very well funded.
And the main effort is to what? Promote Putin?
No, it's not only about that. It's also, of course, it's not only about propaganda. Well, to some extent, it was also used for propaganda reasons. I remember that back in 2014, an organization based in the United States of the Russians was used to send a letter to Obama blaming him of being unfair to Putin's claims on Crimea. So they tried to pretend that there are some communities of the Russians living in the United States who are actually supporting the annexation of Crimea. But of course, it's not only about that. It's also about dealing with potential threats to political stability in the country. And the KGB before that, and now the Russian security services, they actually believe that political exiles at some point might pose a threat. So they need to be watched.
So the goal here is not to spy, let's say, on the United States using the diaspora, but checking in on the diaspora to make sure they're not plotting an overthrow of Putin.
Yes, something like that. Because again, you need to have some divide of responsibilities between the agencies. As I said, you have three of them. So you have the foreign intelligence, and these guys, they need to do the heavy lifting and espionage. They need to spy on Americans. You have the military intelligence, and these guys, they need to steal military secrets. But the FSB, well, because a big objective in the country or abroad is to protect the political stability of the country, meaning protecting political regime. That means that they need to keep watch on political exiles and on the Russians abroad.
Very interesting. Andrei, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for this article in the Daily Beast. It was great reading it and great talking to you again. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're listening and watching Rashkin Report. This is Yuri Rashkin. Till we meet again. Take care.